Okay, I have my notes for section 1.2, adding integers. So what you should do, you should fold it along this line, and when you're finished with it, at the end of this video, you'll be pasting it into your notebook. Okay, so 1.2, adding integers. So now now that you should have practiced using your counters by this point, the rules for adding integers. Adding integers with the same sign, we add the absolute value of the integers and then use the common sign. So for example, if you add a 2 and you add a 5, so that's like you've got all yellow integer counters, you end up with a big pile of 7, but you don't get any zeros out of those. So you just add the numbers, and because they were both positives, the answer is positive. Another example, -2 plus -5. So this will be a big pile of red integer counters because they're all negatives. You would end up with 7 reds, so your answer would come out to be -7. But again, the rule here is that you add the absolute values of the numbers. 2 and 5 is 7, and you keep the common sign. So because they were all negatives, the answer is negative. So let's look at an example. Find -2 plus -4. Then use a number line to check your answer. Okay, so if you need to use your integer counters, use your integer counters. That's okay. If I use my integer counters, I've got 2 reds and I've got 4 reds. So that gives me a big pile of 6 reds. So my answer is -6. Okay, so my answer, I'm going to say the sum is -6. You could also use the rule. The absolute value of -2 is 2. The absolute value of -4 is 4. 2 plus 4 is 6. Use the common sign. So they were negatives. The answer is negative. How do we use the number line to check our answer? All right, so on the number line, we're going to find -2 first. Here's -2 right there. And we need to add -4. If I add negatives, that means I have to go into the negative numbers. So if I add -4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I end up at -6. So that's my answer. All right, on your own. Now this time it just says add. So you can use the rule, you can use your counters, you can use your number line. You can use whatever you want to get your answer. Check your answers. If you're having difficulty with this, ask Mrs. Lewis or Mrs. Davies for help. Okay, so two numbers that are the same distance from 0 but on opposite sides of 0 are called opposites. And I'm supposed to be using my pencil now. Opposites. For example, -3 and +3 are opposites. Yes, let me kind of draw you a picture so we can understand it. So I've got a number line here. There's my 0, 1, 2, 3. And over here, -1, -2, -3. Okay, so let's choose two numbers that are the same distance from 0 but on opposite sides. Let's say 2. If I take the number 2, what number is the same distance from 0 but on the opposite side? Would it be -2? Okay, so 2 and -2 are called opposites. Okay, what is the opposite of -1? Here's -1. You need the number that's the same distance from 0 but on the opposite side. So -1 and +1 are opposites. -3 and +3 are opposites. That's what opposites mean. Adding integers with different signs. All right, we blank the numbers and then use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. Okay, so we're not going to fill it in yet. We're going to think about it first. So look over here. We've got 8 plus -10. Okay, let's go through the. Let's do this one with the with our integer counters. So we're doing in our notes. We're doing 8 plus -10. All right, so this time we're doing opposite signs. What's going to happen with the numbers now? So there's a 0. There's a 0. Zeros go away. There's a 0, it goes away. 0 goes away. 0 goes away. What's going to be left when we're done? 0 goes away. Goes away. What's left? We got 2 reds. So our answer is -2. So what happened with that? What do you think the rule is here? We had a +8 and a -10. If the signs are opposite, you're going to have all those zeros canceling each other out. So you're actually going to be removing your some of your integer counters when you do that. And I'm sorry, this is too far. So if you're adding integers with different signs, the rule here is that you subtract the numbers. So write subtract in your blank. Adding integers with different signs, so that means you got red ones and yellow ones, and you get all those zeros, so you're going to end up removing integer counters, so you need to subtract your numbers. Then use the sign of the integer with a greater absolute value. So if you had more yellows, you're going to end up with a yellow. So that means if your original positive number was bigger, then you're going to end up with a positive answer. And in this example, our 10 is bigger than 8. So since 10 was negative, our answer is also negative. Okay, so let's summarize that rule. That rule might seem complicated. Adding integers with different signs, we subtract the numbers and then use the sign of the integer with a greater absolute value. Okay, it takes some practice. It does. This does take some time. -13 plus 17. Okay, so notice which one of these are opposite signs. So you subtract 17, take away 13, you get 4. How do you figure out if it's a positive or a negative? Well, because 17 is bigger than 13 and this bigger one was a positive, the answer is positive. Additive inverse property. The sum. What does sum mean? Sum means it's the answer after you add. The sum of an integer and its additive inverse, or another word for additive inverse is opposite, and we talked about opposite a moment ago. The sum of an integer and its opposite is always going to be 0. These are the examples. 6 plus -6, those are opposites, and if you add those together, you get 0. -25 plus 25, those are opposites. If you add those together, you get 0. So anytime you add a number with its opposite, your answer is always 0. That's what you're doing when you match up the positives and the negatives with your integer counters. All right, example 2. Adding integers with different signs. So part A, we want to find 5 plus -10. Okay, again, if you want to use your integer counters, go for it. That's fine. If you don't feel like you need to, then you can look at it another way. So 5 plus -10, these are opposite signs. So the rule is you subtract the numbers. 10 take away 5 is 5. And then you decide if it's a positive or a negative. Well, because you had more negatives than you had positives, you're going to have negatives left over. So your answer is -5. Part B. -3 plus 7. You're adding different signs. So you subtract. 7 take away 3 gives you 4. Then you decide if it's positive or negative. If you think about yellow and red counters, you had 7 yellows and you had 3 reds. So what's left over after you get all your zeros? You're left with yellows because there were more yellows. So your answer is positive. Part C. Find -12 plus 12. Okay? This one, if you remember the rule that we just talked about, you don't even have to do any work to show because these are opposites. 12 and -12 are opposites. If you add those together, you will always get 0. And if you do it with your counters, you can have 12 reds and 12 yellows and match up all your zeros and you won't have anything left after you do that. So here's some that you can do to practice on your own. Check your answers. If you're having difficulty with this, ask Mrs. Lewis or Mrs. Davies for help. All right, and example 3, the list shows 4 bank transactions. Okay, so we've got a deposit of $50, so a withdrawal of negative $40, deposit of $75, a withdrawal of negative $50. Find the sum of all 4 transactions. So this is where it's going to get hard to continue to use integer counters, but if you wanted to draw pictures and color them, you could do it that way. Just be careful that you don't lose track. But as the numbers get bigger, it becomes more beneficial to use your rules now. So we need to, you'll notice you've got 2 positives. So let's talk about what a positive integer means and a negative integer means. Positive means that you have it. Negative means that you don't have it. So like in terms of money, if you, let's say you don't have any lunch money and you get a slice of pizza that you have to pay for later, that's an example of negative. Maybe it's $3. So you've got negative $3 because you've got to pay for that money when you get it, or you got to pay for that pizza when you get your money. So the deposits in the bank would be when you put money into your account, and the withdrawals are when you're taking money back out of it. So that's why the deposits are positive, the withdrawals are negative. So we got to add all these together. You might find it helpful to group them with the positives together first. So 50 plus 75 is going to give you 125. And then negative 40 and negative 50 would give you, these are the same signs, you're going to add them and get negative 90. And then add these have different signs. 125 plus negative 90. Okay, this time you're adding different signs, so the rule now is that you need to subtract the 2 numbers. So 125 minus 90, that's going to give you how much? 125 minus 90 is going to give you 35. And is that positive or negative? Well, because your bigger number over here was a positive number, 125 was bigger than 90, and the positive, the 125 was positive, so your answer is positive. So you have $35. So that's the work that you would want to show for that problem. And that completes your notes for section 1.2.